YouTube, once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking Auburn football, post-Georgia, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. As a matter of fact, a lot of you all wouldn't believe that this rivalry's win-loss ratio is actually a little bit closer than you would expect, considering the fact that Auburn has not won a game in Athens since 2005. That continued this year, and Auburn hasn't been successful against Georgia, whether home or away. A lot of questions to be answered, man. I guess, in watching this football game, it just kind of brings credence to where Auburn is now as a program. And I definitely love my Auburn Tigers. I do like to be as non-biased and as analytical as possible because I love the sport. I love the game. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Now, in other college football news, Deion Sanders has been a name that has been mentioned as a possible candidate in the event that Bryan Harsin is no longer the head football coach at Auburn. A very funny exchange between himself and Eddie Robinson Jr., who, what I understand, is not the son of the legendary coach at Alabama State, Eddie Robinson, who I think is a Hall of Famer in the SWAC conference, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, which is arguably one of the more storied conferences in FCS and historically black college football. He had this strange exchange at the end of the game where Deion Sanders reached out, they shook hands, and then, Deion Sanders wanted to give that little bro hug, and then Eddie Robinson Jr. pushed him, kind of sort of like, nah, man, I'm not trying. And then Deion Sanders kind of pushed him off, and it turned into this thing. But I thought that was absolutely hilarious. But big shout out to Deion Sanders, who has revolutionized the historically black college football as a thing. Because for a long time, because of, how players were being recruited, African-American players being recruited into Power 5 football, it basically depleted that whole genre of football. But it's starting to pick up again, and big shout out to those guys. And this is not a thing to where, but it's a part of America. It's a part of our culture, to where, you have historically black college football, and those guys are really playing hard, and they're putting some guys in the NFL. Deion Sanders had the opportunity to have the best cornerback in the country to come down to Jackson State. Big shout out to those guys. But now, as we talk about Auburn, we also want to touch on Brian Kelly as well at LSU. He's struggling, man. And I know a lot of you guys at the beginning of the season talked about an SEC coach. Is this guy an SEC coach? Or you're not necessarily talking about Brian Kelly, but just talking about the coach in general. Does this person, do these people have what it takes to deal with all what I talk about as the rigors? And that's a lot of levels of rigors in the SEC. You come from Notre Dame. I mean, you got to be a pretty good student to get into Notre Dame. So you pretty much don't have the extracurricular, single parent home, coming from obscurity situations going on there. You just pretty much coach these guys, and you play football, and you have this, pretty easy schedule. I'll just say that. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than, having to face maybe one or two ACC conference teams. You even look at Boise State, where Bryan Harsin came from. There's not a lot of obscurity there. There's not a lot of single parent poverty, all of those things going on that adds to the psyche of the players making the right decisions and, dealing with a lot of emotional things of, thinking back at home. Let's just say down in the Deep South, man, it's rough down here. And it's rough in a lot of cities to where a lot of these players are not only dealing with having to bear the burden of probably being the first or maybe one of very few of their genre to be in a college setting, probably the first person in their family to go to college. A lot of these coaches go on these visits, and the houses that they visit are absolutely falling apart. That's not the case for all things, but it is a lot of obscurity. When you talk about recruiting in the Deep South, and you talk about the poverty, you talk about the economic necessity of a lot of these football players, and there's a lot of emotionalism that comes with that, with these players, and you have to be kind of benevolent to a certain degree to these players, because it's not a cut and dry thing. This is not an easy thing to do in the SEC. Yes, you have some of the best college football players in the country, but that thing comes with a lot of baggage. A lot of baggage. And they have a lot of pressure on their shoulders to where they have to they feel like they have to make this work in order to get their families in a different situation via the National Football League. And then we think about the National Football League, the average lifespan of a National Football League player, 3 to 5 years. And that's actually inflated because the typical quarterback, which is the most protected position in the NFL, they last about 10 or 15 years. And then you have some linemen that'll last for a long time. But most of the skill position players that have the opportunity, if they even get the opportunity to make it into the NFL, I mean, the lifespan is really not that long. The income, although up front, is very good, but it's not necessarily sustainable. All right, so if you're in the comment section, go ahead and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn, where we talk about SEC football. We talk about Auburn football especially, because this is a definite War Eagle channel. Like the video, comment, and subscribe. Down in the Deep South, college football is king. And on the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. So let's talk real briefly about the day after of the Georgia game. A lot of times I like to talk about these games the day after, so I can really process what I saw. Number one, for the first time in Brian Harsin's era, and this is not sunshine pumping by any measure of the imagination, double digits in the second half, scored 10 points in the second half, but they were still outscored 28-10 by Georgia after only being down 14-0 in that particular football game. Now, we got to talk about some situational opportunities for Auburn. Auburn going back and forth, 0-0 game after the first quarter. Brian Harsin, in my opinion, he just can't get over himself when it comes to having to trying to steal a possession. He just has to steal a possession or find a way to create some type of imbalance, but he does it at the expense of his defense for sure. But he does it at the expense of winning a really casual war at that moment and really putting the team in, a very adverse position. So when I found out in the game that Auburn would not receive the football in the second half, I was actually elated, because if you look at Auburn in really high consequence football games, Brian Harsin always has this temptation to call a play that makes absolutely no sense at that point in the game, and it turns into either a turnover or it turns to a really momentum shifting situation. We're going to get back to that in a second. But Brian Harsin just could not resist the temptation, 4th down and 6 on the minus side of the football field, now, I get it. You're trying to create some momentum, but your players had already put themselves in a position to continue to make this a game. It's nothing. Flip the field, get the momentum, and learn from Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart, early in that football game, had a 4th down and maybe 1.5. 9.9 times out of 10, with the offensive line that has been recruited at Georgia, He knows in his heart though, that he could have gotten that first down. But what did Kirby Smart do? Kirby Smart has coached in the SEC for a long time, and he understands how momentum can shift if you make a real errant play at the wrong time. He bought his team out. They punted the football, and they flipped field position. Auburn in that particular football game, especially in the first half, started in very, very minus territory. You're talking about at the 15, at the 10, at the 25. Auburn did not start out in favorable field position at all in the first half. I'm pretty much off the whole Brian Harsin getting fired train. That's not my decision to make. He's still the football coach. He's still going to coach Auburn going into this Ole Miss game. If I were to have an opinion, I would say that Brian Harsin needs to throw out any trick plays he's got. Just don't do it. Don't do it. It doesn't work. These guys in the SEC are very athletic. They are trained to have their eye out, even if, especially considering the way you coach, he coaches. They are trained to be aware of any type of trickery that may take place. So Auburn decides to go for a fake punt and give Georgia the football in plus territory, and that shifted the momentum of the game moving forward. Also, Robbie Ashford, 13 of 38, 165 yards. If you're 13 for 38 for 165 yards and one touchdown, that's not going to get you where you need to be in any conference, let alone the SEC conference. I think Robbie Ashford was relied upon a little bit too much. And with the observation of the offensive line, rightfully so. I mean, couldn't get any push up front to get the running game going. He was actually the leading rusher in this football game with nine carries for 52 yards. He averaged about 5.8 yards every time he touched the football. That is a formula for game day disaster in Athens, Georgia. Jarquez Hunter, one of the showpieces of the football game, had 5 carries, 20 yards at 4.0 yards per carry. Had 3 catches for 73 yards, which was inflated by a very athletic catch out of the backfield where he took it on for a touchdown. Tank Bigsby continues to be a no-call, no-show for the Auburn Tigers. Thought to be one of the better, even the announcers talked about Tank Bigsby as one of the best running backs in the SEC. My absolute honest opinion of this, I don't think he's a bad running back, but he's not the best statistically, not even close to being the best in the SEC. And he just doesn't seem to be able to find a groove. And maybe that's the coaching staff. Maybe the coaching staff sees something that we don't see. Hopefully that can change in this Ole Miss game, because at a certain point, this Auburn football team is going to have to find a way to run the football. Your quarterback, Robbie Ashford, all but a true freshman, hadn't played football in a long time, being forced into position because of a TJ Finley injury, can't be your leading rusher. Just can't. You talk about Georgia on offense really dominating up front as far as the running game. Georgia rolls up 500 yards against Auburn, a couple of big plays for the Georgia Bulldogs, a couple of missed big plays. I thought Stetson Bennett had some opportunities, some really incredible opportunities down the field that he just missed. But where does that lead Auburn going into Ole Miss? Auburn has to rally themselves together. You still got your head coach. You still have each other. You still have an opportunity to go on the road against Ole Miss, who is a very good football team. They're a ranked football team. They're ranked number 9 in the country. You are heavily favored to lose that game. You have I would say a sound defense. The offensive line definitely has to come together and figure out some type of identity to make this offense flow. Once that happens, Auburn may have some opportunities. But until then, we're going to get the same thing each week. We're going to get them coming out pretty hard. I think it's no doubt that Auburn will come out. It'll be a 3-0 or maybe 7-0 at worst. End of the first half. They might even go into the second half only down maybe 10-0. Hell, they might be up. But where is the tenacity going to come with this football team to say, look, we have to figure out a way to not make the mistakes. That's from the coaching staff. That's from the players. We have to figure out how to not make these crucial mistakes that relinquishes any opportunity to win football games. I love these Auburn Tigers, man. I think these guys are fighting hard. It's tough for them, though. It's tough right now. It's tough as an Auburn fan. I'll tell you what. Leave your comments in the comment section. We're going to talk a little bit more as we preview Ole Miss, man. I really enjoyed watching them play. They have a good football team. Go ahead and like this video, comment, and subscribe to Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger. War, damn, Eagle.